A true historical story. For years, the United States believed it held the most powerful secret in the world, a weapon so destructive, so unimaginable, that it would change the future of warfare forever. Only a handful of scientists and government officials even knew it existed. But somewhere in the shadows of the Cold War, a quiet man with a calm voice and an ordinary life was secretly passing that ultimate secret to the Soviet Union. His name was Klaus Fuchs, and his betrayal would become one of the most shocking espionage stories in American history. In the early 1940s, the world was already burning in the chaos of World War II. Europe had been devastated by years of conflict. Germany, under Adolf Hitler, had conquered large parts of the continent. The Soviet Union was fighting desperately to survive the German invasion, and the United States had just entered the war after the attack on Pearl Harbor. But behind the battlefields, another race had begun, a race that most people didn't even know existed. Scientists had discovered that splitting the atom could release an enormous amount of energy. If controlled, it could power entire cities, but if weaponized, it could destroy them. The United States feared that Nazi Germany might develop such a weapon first, so the US government launched one of the most secret and expensive scientific projects in history. It was called the Manhattan Project. Across the country, laboratories and secret research facilities appeared almost overnight. Entire towns were built in remote deserts and hidden valleys. Thousands of scientists, engineers, and workers were recruited. Most of them had no idea what they were actually building. But among the brilliant minds brought into the project was a quiet German-born physicist, Klaus Fuchs. At first glance, he seemed like the perfect scientist for such a mission. He was intelligent, disciplined, and deeply opposed to the Nazi regime that had taken control of Germany. In fact, Fuchs had fled Germany years earlier to escape Hitler's government. He eventually settled in Britain, where he continued his work in physics. His talent quickly caught the attention of leading scientists, and before long, he was working alongside some of the brightest minds in the world. When Britain joined forces with the United States to develop the atomic bomb, Fuchs was selected as one of the key scientists sent to America. He arrived at Los Alamos, the secret laboratory in the New Mexico desert where the world's top physicists were racing to unlock the power of the atom. The atmosphere there was unlike anything anyone had ever experienced. Security was intense. Armed guards surrounded the facility. Scientists carried special identification badges everywhere they went. Letters were censored. Phone calls were monitored. Even many of the scientists working there didn't fully understand the scale of the project. But they all shared one goal: build the bomb before Nazi Germany did. Fuchs quickly became a valuable member of the team. His calculations and theoretical work helped scientists understand how to design the weapon. He worked closely with famous physicists like J. Robert Oppenheimer, the scientific director of the Manhattan Project. To his colleagues, Fuchs seemed calm, polite, and intensely focused on his work. No one suspected that behind that quiet personality was a secret that could change the balance of power in the entire world. Because long before he ever arrived in America, Klaus Fuchs had already made a decision. He believed that the atomic bomb was too powerful for any single nation to control. In his mind, if only the United States possessed such a weapon, it could dominate the world. So he began secretly passing information to the Soviet Union. At first, the messages were small details about research progress, technical notes, scientific data. But over time, the information became more significant: blueprints, calculations, design concepts for the bomb itself. The Soviet Union, desperate to catch up in the nuclear race, eagerly received every piece of intelligence. They knew that if America had the bomb and they did not, the balance of power after the war would be dangerously unequal. So Soviet intelligence agents carefully managed their contact with Fuchs. Meetings took place in quiet parks, crowded streets, and anonymous apartments. Messages were passed through coded notes and trusted intermediaries. Meanwhile, the Manhattan Project continued its race toward history. By 1945, the scientists at Los Alamos were preparing to test the first atomic bomb ever created. On the morning of July 16, 1945, deep in the desert of New Mexico, the world changed forever. The test was called Trinity. At exactly 5:29 a.m., the bomb detonated. A blinding flash of light filled the sky. A massive fireball rose into the air. A shockwave rolled across the desert. The scientists watching the explosion knew instantly that they had succeeded. Humanity had entered the nuclear age. When the Soviet Union successfully detonated its first atomic bomb in August 1949, the reaction inside Washington was immediate and intense. For years, American intelligence agencies had confidently believed that the Soviet nuclear program was far behind. Many experts had predicted it would take the Soviets at least another decade to develop a weapon. Yet suddenly, the impossible had happened. The Soviet Union had the bomb. Inside the Pentagon, military leaders stared at reports in disbelief. In the White House, President Harry Truman demanded answers. Intelligence officials began asking the same question over and over again. How had the Soviet Union advanced so quickly? The possibility that terrified American officials the most was simple: espionage. Someone had helped them. Within weeks, the FBI launched one of the largest intelligence investigations in American history. Agents began reviewing every scientist, engineer, and worker who had ever been involved in the Manhattan Project. Thousands of people had worked on the project across multiple secret locations: Los Alamos in New Mexico, Oak Ridge in Tennessee, and Hanford in Washington State. Security during the war had been tight, but the scale of the project meant it was impossible to watch everyone at all times. If someone had passed secrets to the Soviet Union, finding that person would not be easy. Meanwhile, far away in Europe, Klaus Fuchs continued his life as a respected scientist. After the war ended, he had returned to Britain and resumed his research at the Atomic Energy Research Establishment in Harwell. To his colleagues, he remained the same quiet and brilliant physicist they had always known. But intelligence agencies were slowly closing in. The first real breakthrough came not from the United States, but from British intelligence. During the late 1940s, Western intelligence agencies began making progress in a highly secret operation known as Project Venona. This operation involved decrypting Soviet intelligence communications that had been sent during World War II. The Soviet Union had believed their codes were unbreakable, but American cryptanalysts had managed to partially decipher some of the messages. What they found was alarming. The decrypted communications revealed that Soviet intelligence had successfully placed multiple spies inside the Manhattan Project. These spies had provided detailed information about the development of the atomic bomb. Even more troubling, the messages included references to a mysterious source known only by code names. One of those code names was REST. Gradually, analysts began comparing the messages with personnel records from the Manhattan Project. Patterns started to appear. The code name REST seemed to refer to a physicist who had worked at Los Alamos and later returned to Britain. Investigators began narrowing their list of suspects, and eventually, one name kept appearing again and again: Klaus Fuchs. At first, the evidence was indirect. There was no confession, no clear document linking him to espionage. But intelligence officers continued to gather clues. They reviewed travel records, personal histories, and communications. Slowly, a picture began to form. Fuchs had been born in Germany in 1911. His father had been a Protestant pastor who openly opposed the Nazi regime. As a young man, Fuchs had become involved in left-wing political movements that opposed Hitler's government. When the Nazis rose to power in 1933, Fuchs fled Germany to avoid persecution.
He eventually found refuge in Britain, where he studied physics at the University of Bristol and later at the University of Edinburgh. But investigators also discovered something else. During his time as a student in Germany, Fuchs had briefly been a member of the German Communist Party. That detail immediately caught the attention of intelligence officials. It didn't prove he was a spy, but it raised serious questions. By 1949, British intelligence decided it was time to confront him. On December 21, 1949, Klaus Fuchs was quietly summoned for questioning by MI5, Britain's domestic intelligence service. The interview began calmly. Investigators asked routine questions about his work and his past. Fuchs answered politely and carefully, but the investigators had already studied the Venona messages. They knew far more than they revealed. As the questioning continued, they gradually presented more details. They mentioned meetings. They mentioned coded communications. They hinted that Soviet intelligence had a source inside the atomic project. At first, Fuchs denied everything, but the investigators kept pressing. Hour after hour, the pressure increased. Finally, something changed. Fuchs realized that the intelligence officers already knew enough to expose him, and in that moment, he made a decision. He confessed. Calmly and without drama, Klaus Fuchs admitted that he had passed atomic secrets to the Soviet Union. He explained that he had first contacted Soviet intelligence while living in Britain during World War II. He believed that the Soviet Union, which had suffered enormous losses fighting Nazi Germany, deserved access to the same knowledge the United States possessed. In his mind, sharing nuclear secrets would create a balance of power. Fuchs insisted that his actions had been motivated by ideology, not money. Unlike many spies, he had not demanded payment. He had acted because he believed it was the right thing to do. To the investigators listening to him, the confession was astonishing. For years, this quiet scientist had been one of the most trusted members of the atomic research community. Yet he had secretly delivered some of the most important scientific information in the world to America's greatest rival. The British government quickly arrested him. In March 1950, Klaus Fuchs was formally charged with violating the Official Secrets Act. His trial attracted enormous attention on both sides of the Atlantic. Newspapers in the United States and Britain filled their front pages with the shocking details. Headlines described the case as one of the most dangerous espionage operations in history. Many Americans were furious. The atomic bomb had been developed with enormous effort and expense. Thousands of scientists had worked in secrecy to build it, and now it appeared that one man had helped deliver those secrets to the Soviet Union. During the trial, Fuchs remained calm. He did not attempt to deny his actions. Instead, he openly explained why he had done it. He told the court that he believed nuclear weapons were too dangerous for any single country to control. Sharing the information, he argued, would create a balance of power. The judge was not convinced. On March 1, 1950, Klaus Fuchs was found guilty. He was sentenced to 14 years in prison, the maximum penalty allowed under British law. But the story was far from ended, because Fuchs's confession revealed something even more alarming. He had not acted alone, and somewhere other spies might still be hiding inside America's most secret programs. The hunt was only beginning.
When Klaus Fuchs confessed to passing atomic secrets to the Soviet Union, the shockwave spread quickly through both American and British intelligence agencies. But for investigators, the confession raised a terrifying possibility. If Fuchs had delivered information to the Soviets, someone must have been receiving it. Spies rarely worked alone. There had to be couriers, handlers, and possibly even other scientists involved. The next phase of the investigation began almost immediately. British authorities shared Fuchs's full confession with the FBI. American agents carefully studied every detail. One name soon appeared in the reports: Harry Gold. According to Fuchs, Gold had been the courier who collected the secret information from him. Gold had acted as the middleman between the scientist and Soviet intelligence. But identifying Harry Gold was only the first step. Finding him would prove far more difficult. Harry Gold was not a famous scientist or a high-ranking government official. He was an ordinary chemist from Philadelphia. Quiet,
Polite and unremarkable, he lived a life that seemed completely normal. He worked long hours in laboratories and spent his free time reading or visiting friends. To anyone who knew him, Gold appeared harmless. But behind that ordinary life was a secret role in one of the most dangerous espionage networks of the Cold War. In May 1950, FBI agents finally tracked him down. They approached him carefully, hoping to avoid alerting any other potential spies. When they began questioning him, Gold initially denied everything. But just like Klaus Fuchs before him, the pressure of the investigation slowly wore him down. Eventually, Harry Gold confessed. Yes, he had served as a courier for Soviet intelligence. Yes, he had met with Klaus Fuchs during the war. And yes, he had transported secret information about the atomic bomb. But during his confession, Gold revealed something even more alarming. He had also received atomic information from another source, a scientist who had worked at the Manhattan Project facility in Los Alamos. That scientist's name was David Greenglass. Greenglass had been a machinist at Los Alamos, where he helped build components for the atomic bomb. His job gave him access to technical information about the weapon's design. After the war, he had returned to New York and resumed a normal life. But investigators soon discovered that Greenglass had shared information about the bomb with Soviet intelligence. And the person who had encouraged him to do it was his brother-in-law, Julius Rosenberg. The investigation was rapidly expanding. Now the FBI was no longer chasing a single spy. They were uncovering an entire network. Julius Rosenberg lived in New York City with his wife, Ethel Rosenberg. To neighbors, the couple seemed like an ordinary American family. Julius worked as an electrical engineer. Ethel took care of their two young sons. But according to investigators, Julius had secretly recruited individuals to provide information to the Soviet Union. When David Greenglass was arrested and questioned, he eventually confirmed that his brother-in-law had asked him to share atomic secrets. Greenglass claimed that Ethel Rosenberg had even helped type some of the reports that were passed to Soviet agents. The accusations stunned the country. For many Americans, the idea that a family living quietly in New York City could be involved in nuclear espionage was almost impossible to believe. But the evidence continued to build. In July 1950, Julius Rosenberg was arrested. Shortly afterward, Ethel Rosenberg was also taken into custody. The arrests triggered one of the most controversial espionage trials in American history. The trial began in March 1951 in a federal courthouse in New York. Prosecutors argued that the Rosenbergs played a central role in delivering atomic secrets to the Soviet Union. They claimed that Julius had organized the spy network while Ethel had assisted him. Witnesses described meetings, coded messages, and secret exchanges of information. The most important testimony came from David Greenglass. He told the court that Julius had recruited him during the war. He also claimed that Ethel had typed notes containing information about the atomic bomb. The defense team fought aggressively against the accusations. They argued that the evidence was weak and that the witnesses were unreliable. They also pointed out that the Cold War climate had created intense fear of communism in the United States. Many people worried that the trial might be influenced by political pressure rather than facts. But after weeks of testimony, the jury reached its verdict. Both Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were found guilty of espionage. The verdict shocked the world. Supporters of the Rosenbergs protested outside the courthouse. Many people believed the punishment was too severe. International appeals were sent to the U.S. government asking for clemency. Even famous scientists and public figures joined the debate. But the American government refused to change the sentence. On June 19, 1953, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were executed in the electric chair at Sing Sing prison. The case became one of the most controversial events of the Cold War. Some believed the Rosenbergs had committed serious crimes against their country. Others believed the trial had been unfair. The debate continued for decades. Meanwhile, Klaus Fuchs remained in prison in Britain. Despite the global controversy surrounding the spy cases, he remained calm and quiet. In 1959, after serving 9 years of his sentence, Fuchs was released for good behavior. Instead of returning to the West, he moved to East Germany, a Soviet-aligned communist state. There, he resumed his career as a physicist and became a respected scientist once again. He eventually rose to become deputy director of a major nuclear research institute. To the Soviet Union and its allies, Fuchs was seen as a hero who had helped create nuclear balance in the world. But in the United States and Britain, his name became a symbol of betrayal. His actions had accelerated the nuclear arms race between the United States and the Soviet Union, and that race would soon dominate global politics for the next 40 years. Because once both superpowers possessed nuclear weapons, the world entered a terrifying new era. An era where a single mistake could lead to global destruction. An era known as the Cold War. And the secrets that Klaus Fuchs had passed along would play a major role in shaping that dangerous new world.
By the early 1950s, the world had entered a completely new and frightening era. For the first time in human history, multiple nations possessed weapons capable of destroying entire cities in seconds. The United States had detonated the first atomic bombs in 1945. The Soviet Union had followed just 4 years later in 1949. And now, both superpowers were racing to build something even more powerful: the hydrogen bomb. Unlike the atomic bombs used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the hydrogen bomb used nuclear fusion instead of nuclear fission. This meant the explosion could be hundreds of times more powerful. Entire regions, not just cities, could be destroyed. In 1952, the United States successfully tested the first hydrogen bomb in the Pacific Ocean. The explosion was so massive that it completely vaporized the small island where it had been detonated. 1 year later, the Soviet Union tested its own hydrogen bomb. The nuclear arms race had officially begun. Military strategists on both sides developed new plans for potential nuclear war. Missiles capable of carrying nuclear warheads were developed. Submarines were equipped with atomic weapons. Long-range bombers patrolled the skies. Each country feared that the other might launch a surprise attack. To prevent that, both sides built more weapons, thousands of them. By the 1960s, the United States and the Soviet Union together had more than 60,000 nuclear weapons. Historians would later debate how much influence Klaus Fuchs had on these events. Some experts argued that the Soviet Union would have eventually developed atomic weapons, even without his help. But many believed that the information he provided accelerated the Soviet nuclear program by several years. Those years were critical. They changed the balance of power in the early Cold War. Instead of one nuclear superpower, the world now had two. Klaus Fuchs himself rarely spoke publicly about his actions. After moving to East Germany, he lived a relatively quiet life. He married, continued his scientific work, and eventually became a respected figure in the East German scientific community. To the Western world, however, his name remained associated with one of the most significant espionage cases in history. The man who had helped build the atomic bomb had also helped spread its secrets. Klaus Fuchs died in 1988 at the age of 76. By that time, the Cold War itself was beginning to come to an end. Just a few years later, the Soviet Union collapsed, and the decades-long rivalry between the two nuclear superpowers finally faded. But the world that emerged was still shaped by the legacy of the nuclear age. Even today, multiple nations possess nuclear weapons. The fear of nuclear conflict has never completely disappeared. And historians still look back on the early days of the atomic era with a mixture of fascination and caution. Because the story of Klaus Fuchs is not just about espionage. It is about the dangerous power of scientific discovery. It is about the political struggles that shaped the 20th century. And it is about a single decision made by one quiet scientist, a decision that helped transform global history. In the end, the atomic secrets he passed along did not simply change the balance of power between two nations. They changed the future of the entire world. Humanity had entered the nuclear age, and there was no turning back.